Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi. Now, if there is a toy gimmick that everyone remembers from the 70s, then it is Steve Austin's Bionic Eye. But he was not alone in having the Bionic Eye, there were others. So today we're going to take a look at a couple of figures that had the Bionic Eye features and see how they worked. The one toy that everyone remembers having a Bionic Eye is of course Steve Austin from the $6 Million Man. Now this was released in 1975 by General Mills and Kenner to coincide with the TV show featuring Steve Austin, the $6 Million Man. And one of the features he had in that show, apart from the fact he had a bionic arm and bionic legs, was the fact that one of his eyes was bionic and he could see for a very long way. So when they made the toy, they thought it would be a great idea to add that feature to the toy. Now if we look at Steve Austin's face, you can clearly see here on the front of him that he has a normal eye and one that is all sort of glassy and weird. And as a child, I actually thought this was a bit scary, but this is the main feature on the toy. If we turn him round, you can see there's a hole in the back of his head, and if you were to look through that hole, you would see what Steve Austin saw. So let's take a look through Steve Austin's eye. So as you can see, the effect you get is a pretty weird effect. What it is there's a little magnifying glass in there, which doesn't really magnify it. In fact, it shrinks everything down, so you're sort of looking through a little fish eye lens, and you can see a weird sort of view of the world. And I always thought that that was actually quite a good interpretation of what was going on when you looked through Steve Austin's eye. You saw everything, but it was all a little bit smaller and a little bit harder to work out. A lot of people thought that the eye should magnify, but I actually quite liked that feature. It was quite a nice little gimmick at the time, and when I first got this toy, this was the only one that did it, so it was quite a novel feature. But of course, once someone comes up with a good toy idea, it gets copied and used again. So let's take a look at Atomic Man. Now, Atomic Man was released here in the UK as part of the Action Man line of figures by Palitoy, but if you're from the States and you know G.I. Joe, then you will know him better as Mike Power. He is a G.I. Joe figure. In the UK, of course, he came in a different outfit and he had the flocked hair, but in the US you'll have seen him without that and a sort of more military type uniform. Now this figure, I always thought had the same feature as Steve Austin, but it turns out many years later when researching him that he doesn't. Basically his eye is supposed to be a signalling eye rather than a little magnifying eye. So it's never actually supposed to have done what Steve Austin did, but as a child I thought that's what he was supposed to do, and I was always looking through the hole in the top of his head thinking, why can't I see anything? And the reason I can't see anything is because it's not supposed to do that. Basically all this eye is supposed to do is light up. If you shine a light in the top of him, it should light up. So let's see what that looks like. So here we are. I have a small torch and I'm going to shine this in the hole in the top of his head, and you should see that his eye sort of lights up like it is indicating to people. It's not the greatest of features. I did think that this was supposed to magnify, but it doesn't. So I'm still going to class this as a bionic eye, but it isn't. It doesn't do the same thing that Steve Austin's does. This is more like the modern R2-D2s, the way you have a little light diffuser that lights up the front of their eyes, but it's still quite a cool feature. Last and by no means least of the 1970s Bionic Eye toys is of course the 12-inch Boba Fett from Kenner. Now this was released in 1979, and as it's a Kenner toy it uses the exact same gimmick as Steve Austin because it's the same company. So any child that got this would have known immediately what it was. You turned Boba Fett round, on the back of his head there is a tiny little hole, and if you peer through the hole you get to see a magnified view of the world. So let's peer through Boba Fett's eye. But there's a problem, as you can see, with Boba Fett, and that's the front of his helmet. Because it's a T-shaped, the little aperture that the eye can see through is a lot smaller. Steve Austin has quite a big sort of round eye hole there, but Boba Fett has a small little slit. So although you look through a hole at the back, by the time it gets to the front, you're actually just looking through a small slit, and really you can see very little. The gimmick still works, but it's nowhere near as good as the original Steve Austin one, so it's a little bit disappointing compared to what we could have had. I'm sure over the years there have been more toys that have used this gimmick, but for me these are the top 3 ones. These all came out in the 70s and they're all ones that I played with as a child. Steve Austin is by far the best use of this little bionic eye mechanism, but the others do a good job. I'm actually quite intrigued by the Atomic Man's eye, because I really did think that that was a magnifier, but now that looking at all the sort of documentation, it's actually just supposed to light up. So it's a completely different method of doing things, but it was something I thought it should have magnified just because of his name Atomic Man and the fact that he had bionic arms and legs. He was a poor man's rip-off of Steve Austin, so I thought he would do the same things. And Boba Fett, he comes in a poor second really. The gimmick does work very well, but because of the shape of his helmet you really can't see much through it. So if you want a great bionic eye, of course you've got to go for Steve Austin, and second best is Boba Fett. So I hope my review of this vintage toy gimmick has been of interest to you, and thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter and Facebook.